That day, it rained like the sky was falling apart. I had just lost my job. My wallet had exactly $1.76 left, my phone was dead, and the soles of my shoes had given up somewhere around the last bus stop. But it wasn't just the rain soaking through me, it was life. I felt cold in a way no jacket could fix. And then I saw him. An old man, curled up on the sidewalk, barely shielded by the overhang of a shuttered car repair shop. People walked past like he was invisible, just another pile of garbage washed in by the storm. I almost walked past him too. Almost. Until he coughed. Deep, harsh, and painful. That sound stopped me. I turned back. I didn't think. I didn't weigh pros and cons. I just knelt down, wrapped him in my paper-thin raincoat, and carried him to the nearest clinic. He didn't say much. Just stared at me with these eyes, dark, sharp, and oddly assessing. Back then, I had no idea that moment, kneeling in the mud for a stranger, would be the moment that changed my life forever. I'm not some kind of saint. I've lied, cheated on tests, even stole a loaf of bread once when I was starving. But I've never left someone helpless on the street. Maybe because I know what it feels like to be abandoned. The doctor said he was just suffering from low blood sugar and fatigue. Nothing major. But the old man refused to stay at the clinic. He kept asking me, no, insisting that I take him home. And home turned out to be a crumbling wooden house tucked deep in one of the city's poorest back alleys. It was damp, worn, and barely held together, but neat. Spotless, even. He brewed me tea. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. Calm. Almost commanding. Then he asked me, softly, "Do you think life is fair?" I laughed bitterly. If life were fair, I wouldn't be eating instant noodles for dinner every night. He didn't laugh back. Just looked at me, really looked at me. Like he was trying to see beneath the layers of who I'd become. Later, I'd realize, he was testing me. Not for pity, not for gratitude, but for something else entirely. 3 days later, I went back to return a scarf he had draped over me that rainy night. But the house was gone. No furniture. No lights. No trace. I asked around the neighborhood. No one had ever heard of an old man living there. It was like he'd never existed. I thought maybe I'd hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe it was just one of those strange, rainy night fever dreams. Until I got a phone call. The woman on the other end had a crisp, professional voice, but I could hear her curiosity bleeding through. "Are you the one who helped Mr. Tran on the rainy evening 3 days ago? He would like to meet you. Privately." Mr. Tran? Meet me? And the next thing I knew, I was being escorted into a glass skyscraper downtown, the kind of building I used to cross the street to avoid. Marble floors. Security everywhere. And in the top floor office, surrounded by city lights, stood the same old man. Only now he was in a tailored suit, leather shoes polished to a mirror shine, holding a wine glass like he owned the world. And he looked at me with that same piercing gaze. "You once helped a nameless old man. Today, I'll return that kindness, with something you never saw coming." I stood there frozen, unsure whether to sit down or fall to my knees. Mr. Tran, if that was even his real name, gestured toward the leather chair across from him like we were just two old friends having coffee. But nothing about this felt casual. He didn't speak right away. He just studied me for a while, like I was some equation he was solving in his head. Then, finally, he said, "You reminded me of someone. That's why I let you help me. That's why I disappeared." I frowned. "I didn't help you for a reward, sir. I just..." He cut me off with a raised hand. "I know. That's why you're here." Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. His voice softened. "I used to believe that people like you didn't exist anymore. That kindness was extinct. That everyone had a price. But then, you stopped in the rain. I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking slightly. My shirt was still damp from the walk-in. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. He turned around and looked at me, dead serious. "I want to change your life." The next morning, I woke up in a hotel bed so soft it felt like I'd sunk into a cloud. There were clothes laid out for me. A schedule. A black car waiting downstairs. Every instinct in me said this couldn't be real. But every door I opened after that led me deeper into it. He didn't give me money, at least not at first. What he gave me was knowledge. Access. Rooms full of people I had no business being around. Boardrooms. Banquets. Seminars where the cheapest ticket cost more than my rent. And he was always watching from the sidelines, testing me. When I asked him why he was doing this, he simply said, "You pulled a man from the gutter when you had nothing. Now I want to see what you'll do when you have everything." I thought the hardest part of poverty was hunger. I was wrong. The hardest part is believing you don't belong anywhere. And now, here I was, eating caviar at a table full of CEOs, pretending like I wasn't terrified every second. I'd study until 3 a.m. I memorized stock reports, practiced handshakes, learned how to wear a suit that didn't swallow me whole. Mr. Tran never handed me anything. He opened doors, but I had to walk through them on my own. And the more I learned, the more I realized who he really was. He wasn't just some rich old man. He was one of the most powerful silent investors in the entire country. He owned things without his name ever being attached. A quiet kingmaker behind hundreds of businesses. And no one knew what he looked like. But I did. Then one night, over a quiet dinner, he said something that shook me. "I don't have children. No family left. I built an empire, but I'll die alone unless I find someone worthy to take it all." He stared at me. And I knew. He wasn't just testing me anymore. He was choosing me. I didn't answer him right away. How do you respond to something like that? To a man who'd spent his whole life building an empire now asking if you're worthy of inheriting it. I was just someone who once couldn't afford bus fare home. But he saw something in me. Or maybe he saw someone from his past, someone he failed to save. I never asked. I was too afraid of the answer. Over the next few months, he began introducing me to people with eyes sharper than knives. Bankers. Diplomats. Former enemies who now called him mentor. And every time he stood beside me, silent, letting me speak for myself, letting me rise, or fall, on my own words. But there was one rule. Never tell anyone who I am, he warned. I've spent years hiding behind the curtain. If they know, it all falls apart. I nodded. I didn't know back then just how many people wanted him gone. How many were waiting, patient, vicious, for him to finally vanish. It wasn't long before I saw it, the danger that came with his world. One day you're signing a contract that could change a city's skyline. The next day, you're shaking hands with someone who once hired a hitman. I was in too deep. And yet, I didn't want to leave. He made me feel like I mattered. Like for the first time, my life was more than just surviving the next bill, the next rejection, the next insult from a world that had never made space for people like me. And then, it happened. One morning, I came to the office and he wasn't there. Not at the penthouse. Not at the usual breakfast spot. Not even at the secret apartment only I knew about. Just gone. His assistant handed me a letter. It was sealed in wax. Heavy. Inside, there were only 2 sentences. If you're reading this, it means they've found me. Don't look for me. Protect the legacy. I stood there, heart pounding. Because in that moment, I realized. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was the last person left who knew the truth. And every enemy he ever had, was about to turn their eyes on me. I spent the next week locked in a blur of phone calls, passwords, encrypted files, keys to vaults I didn't know existed. I found out about properties under fake names, funds parked in offshore accounts, and a network of loyalists who answered to no one but him. And now, me. But I also found something else. Something buried deep in an old storage unit, behind a rusted filing cabinet and layers of dust. A picture. Of him. Younger. Smiling. With a woman. And a little boy. On the back, written in his unmistakable hand. "Forgive me, my son." It felt like the floor collapsed beneath me. He had a family. Had. Past tense. Which meant something terrible must have happened. That was the moment I understood. I wasn't just chosen for my kindness, or my loyalty. I was chosen because I reminded him of what he lost. And now, carrying his legacy, meant carrying his ghosts too. For days, I couldn't sleep. I kept going back to that photo. The boy in it must have been 5, 6 at most. Eyes bright. Grinning with 2 missing front teeth. The woman beside him looked like piece made flesh. And Mr. Tran, he looked like a man who still believed in second chances. So what happened? Why did he erase them from his life? And more importantly, what made him choose me? The deeper I dug, the messier it got. Every drawer I opened led to another locked box. Another name. Another secret. There were corporations tied together like spiderwebs, each covering for the other. I was now the legal owner of things I didn't even understand. But I wasn't alone. He left behind his people, his circle. They were loyal, yes. But not to me. At first, they smiled, bowed, pretended I belonged. But I could feel it. The tension. The calculation in their eyes. The doubt. I was an outsider. A ghost in a stranger's empire. Then one day, I walked into a meeting room and silence fell. His top lawyer stood, folded her hands, and said, "We need to vote." I frowned. Vote on what? On whether or not you're fit to lead. My throat tightened. My palms went cold. This wasn't a discussion. It was a quiet coup. But I didn't run. I stood up and looked each of them in the eye. He chose me. Not because I was born into wealth. Not because I knew your games. But because I was the one person who stopped when no one else did. If that doesn't mean anything to you, fine. But I will not walk away just because you're scared of change. And I left. No yelling. No begging. Just silence. The next day, when I returned to the office, his lawyer was waiting by the elevator. She didn't say anything. Just handed me an envelope. Inside was a single note, handwritten in that familiar ink. "You passed." I looked up at her. She smiled for the first time. "He told me to test you. Said you'd either fall or fight." But just as the pieces were finally falling into place, they came. Reporters. Police. Auditors. Someone had leaked a decades-old scandal about a failed hospital project tied to one of Mr. Tran's offshore funds. The headlines called it corruption. Embezzlement. Murder, even. I knew it wasn't true. But the evidence? It was stacked like bricks around my neck. And the worst part? I had no idea who set me up. The empire he built was turning on itself. And I was the last person holding it together. That night, as I stared out over the city lights from his penthouse, I asked myself, what would he do? And I realized something: he wouldn't run. He'd fight. Not for power. Not for pride. But for legacy. And that's exactly what I was going to do. I started with the files. Everything Mr. Tran left behind, passwords, ledgers, coded journals, suddenly became more than just data. They were weapons. And I would use them not to destroy, but to defend. I spent nights poring over his old correspondences. He'd written everything by hand, his thoughts, doubts, fears. He didn't trust email. Said people forgot how dangerous words could be once they were digitized. That's when I found it. A letter. To someone named VT. The handwriting was more emotional than usual, ink blotched in places. If you ever come for me again, I won't stop you. But don't come for him. He doesn't know. He doesn't deserve the war you and I started years ago. That was it. That's when I realized, this wasn't just a business scandal. This was personal. And someone from Mr. Tran's past was back, to finish what they started. The first betrayal came fast. It was Greg, the man who once shook my hand and called me kid like I was some mascot. He leaked documents to the press. Claimed I forged Mr. Tran's will. That I manipulated an old man into signing away billions. I should have seen it coming. He always smiled too much. But I didn't break. I called a press conference. I stood under a blinding wall of cameras and told them everything. Not the sanitized version. The truth. How I'd found Mr. Tran in the rain. How he vanished. How I inherited not just an empire, but a war. And then I said his name. His real name. And everything exploded. Within 24 hours, former employees came forward, not to accuse me, but to defend me. Anonymous donors began supporting his charities again. Even a government official, once considered neutral, released a statement that shifted public opinion. But it still wasn't over. Because there was one more person left to face. VT. I didn't find him. He found me. It was in the old house, the one Mr. Tran lived in when I first met him. I had gone back out of instinct. And there he was. Waiting in the dark. An old man in a wool coat, standing in the exact spot where I had knelt down months ago. You're not him, he said. But you carry his eyes. I didn't speak. You know what he did to me? He asked. I nodded slowly. I read the letters. He looked away. Then you know he took everything. No, I said. You lost everything because both of you made war instead of peace. His eyes glistened. Just for a moment. Then he stepped aside, and left. No threats. No gun. Just silence. Like a ghost leaving the final battlefield. Weeks passed. The investigations faded. The stock market calmed. The empire stabilized. But I wasn't the same. Mr. Tran was still gone. No news. No body. Just a legend now. And me, the accidental heir, carrying a name that didn't belong to me, yet somehow had become mine. On the day of the anniversary, the day I found him in the rain, I walked back to that street. It wasn't raining this time. The air was still. And I looked up at the sky and whispered. I hope I made you proud. It had been 1 year. 12 months since the rain. Since the scarf. Since the world turned upside down and handed me the keys to something I never asked for. I stood in the same office where I once trembled in front of him, Mr. Tran. Now, everything inside it was silent. The leather chair. The heavy desk. The panoramic window that looked out over a city I still didn't fully understand. I'd signed more contracts in the last 6 months than in my entire life before this. I'd shaken hands with billionaires, smiled in rooms where truth was a foreign language, and made decisions that cost millions to people I would never meet. But tonight, I was alone. And in my hands was his last envelope. It had been delivered with no sender, no warning. Just the same wax seal. Inside, there were only 3 words. It's your turn. I stared at them for hours. And then I did something no one expected. I walked away. I signed every share, every title, every holding, over to the foundation he created years ago, back when he still believed in healing the world. I gave the empire back to the people he built it with. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Because for the first time in my life, I knew who I was. I wasn't the empire. I wasn't the suit or the car or the high-rise views. I was the person who stopped in the rain for a stranger. And that had to be enough. I moved into a small apartment above a bookstore by the river. Started writing again. Teaching, sometimes. Reading letters from strangers who'd heard my story and found something in it they needed. And once in a while, I still walk past that alleyway. It's empty now. But every time it rains, I stop. I listen. Because maybe, just maybe, he's still out there. Watching. Waiting. Proud.